They called them God's chosen, the rightful rulers of Europe, their lineage stretching back through centuries of intricate marriages, strategic alliances, and sheer stubborn ambition. Their family motto, Austria est imperare, Orbi universo, often translated as, "It is Austria's destiny to rule the whole world," hinted at the monumental power they once wielded. But behind the glittering crowns and vast empires lay a labyrinth of personal dramas, devastating tragedies, and moments of utter madness. Some ascended to unimaginable heights, shaping continents and histories. Others descended into shadows, their lives ending in scandal, despair, or brutal violence. Their bloodline, thick with the ties that bound cousins to cousins for generations, created both genius and infirmity. Get ready to dive into the private lives of the Habsburgs, a dynasty that defied expectations, broke hearts, and left an indelible mark on the world. Their stories are wilder than any fiction, laced with power, obsession, and sometimes a chilling touch of fate. Number 10. Franz Joseph I. The Emperor Franz Joseph was born into an empire already steeped in tradition and an ancient lineage that carried the weight centuries. His life, stretching from 1830 to 1916, became almost synonymous with the final era of the Habsburg monarchy. He ascended the throne at the tender age of 18 in 1848, a year of widespread revolutions that shook the foundations of Europe. His uncle, Emperor Ferdinand I, was deemed too weak to handle the widespread unrest, and so Franz Joseph, handsome and seemingly steadfast, was placed on the throne by his formidable mother, Archduchess Sophie. The young emperor immediately set about reasserting imperial authority, crushing rebellions in Hungary and Italy with a stern hand. His early years were marked by a fierce determination to restore order and centralize power, believing firmly in his divine right to rule. His personal life, however, was far from the picture of imperial stability. In 1854, he married his cousin Elizabeth of Bavaria. Famously known as Sisi, their union, initially thought to be a love match, quickly soured. Franz Joseph was a man of routine and duty, rising early, working tirelessly at his desk, and adhering strictly to court protocol. Elizabeth, by contrast, was a free spirit, beautiful, athletic, and intensely unconventional. She chafed under the rigid strictures of Viennese court life, finding its ceremonies and expectations suffocating. She yearned for freedom, poetry, and beauty, often embarking on long journeys to escape the confines of the Hofburg Palace. Their marriage became a symbol of two vastly different worlds clashing within the gilded cage of the monarch. Elizabeth's prolonged absences left Franz Joseph often lonely, dedicating himself even more deeply to his imperial duties. He experienced an almost unbearable string of personal losses throughout his long reign. His younger brother Maximilian was executed by firing squad in Mexico in 1867 after a disastrous attempt to establish a second Mexican empire. The news of Maximilian's death devastated Franz Joseph. He had tried to dissuade his brother from the ill-fated adventure, even demanding Maximilian renounce his Habsburg rights before departing for Mexico, a measure Maximilian resented deeply. The emperor received his brother's remains in Vienna, a somber procession underscoring the tragedy. 20 years later, a different kind of personal catastrophe struck. His only son and heir, Crown Prince Rudolf, was found dead in a hunting lodge at Merling in 1889, alongside his young mistress, Baroness Mary Wetzera. The official explanation was heart failure, but rumors of a murder-suicide pact quickly spread, never fully silenced. Franz Joseph was deeply affected by Rudolf's death, which left a profound void in the succession and in his life. He ordered the lodge razed and a chapel built on the site, an attempt to erase the memory of the scandal. The loss of his only son, especially under such scandalous circumstances, weighed heavily on the aging emperor. The tragedies continued. His beloved wife, Elizabeth, was assassinated in Geneva in 1898 by an Italian anarchist named Luigi Lucani. She was stabbed with a sharpened needle while walking along the promenade of Lake Geneva. Franz Joseph was informed of his wife's death with extreme caution, knowing her life had been a source of both joy and immense anxiety for him. He reportedly said, "Nothing has been spared me." This final violent loss seemed to confirm a grim fate for the Habsburg family. Despite these immense personal sorrows, Franz Joseph continued to rule. He saw his empire through significant changes, including the Austro-Hungarian Compromise of 1867, which created the dual monarchy, granting Hungary equal status within the empire. He presided over a period of economic growth and modernization. Even as nationalist tensions simmered beneath the surface, he was a symbol of stability in an era of rapid transformation, a living link to an older world. His daily routine remained rigorous, his dedication to duty unwavering. He worked long hours reviewing documents, receiving visitors, and maintaining a meticulous schedule. Historical records confirm that he rarely took holidays, preferring to remain at his desk in the Hofburg or Schönbrunn Palace. His later years were dominated by the growing international tensions that would eventually engulf Europe. The assassination of his nephew and new heir, Archduke Franz Ferdinand, in Sarajevo in 1914, plunged Europe into the First World War. Franz Joseph, now 84, signed the declaration of war against Serbia, a decision that would lead to the collapse of his ancient dynasty and the redrawing of the map of Europe. He died in November 1916, in the midst of the Great War, never seeing its end. His death marked the symbolic end of an era, a final curtain call for a ruler who had embodied the very essence of the Habsburg Empire for nearly 7 decades. Records from the imperial household indicate his last words were a murmur about his work, reflecting his lifelong dedication to his imperial role. His funeral was a grand, somber affair, a final display of imperial pomp before the empire itself. Crumbled. Number 9. Franz Ferdinand. Archduke Franz Ferdinand, born in 1863, was an unlikely heir to the sprawling Habsburg Empire. He was not the direct successor in his youth. That role belonged to his cousin, Crown Prince Rudolf. Franz Ferdinand's early life was marked by a fragile constitution and a deep passion for hunting. He embarked on extensive world tours, filling countless hunting trophies and expanding his knowledge of various cultures. He was known for his blunt manner, his stubbornness, and his somewhat abrasive personality, traits that did not endear him to the Viennese court or to Emperor Franz Joseph himself. Contemporaries described him as a difficult man, but one with a sharp mind and a strong will. His path to becoming heir presumptive was paved by tragedy. When Crown Prince Rudolf died mysteriously at Merling in 1889, Franz Ferdinand's father, Archduke Karl Ludwig, became the next in line. However, Karl Ludwig renounced his rights, and soon after died from typhoid fever in 1896. After drinking contaminated water during a pilgrimage to the Holy Land, these unexpected events catapulted Franz Ferdinand into the role of the next in line to the throne, a position he never actively sought but accepted with a sense of duty. His personal life took a dramatic turn when he fell deeply in love with Countess Sophie Chotek, a lady-in-waiting to Archduchess Isabella. Sophie, while of noble birth, was not considered of sufficient rank to marry a Habsburg archduke. Their romance was a scandal at court, drawing the ire of Emperor Franz Joseph, who strictly upheld the rigid Habsburg dynastic laws. Franz Ferdinand, however, was unyielding. He refused to marry anyone else, risking his future and deeply frustrating the emperor. After years of persistent defiance, a compromise was finally reached. In 1900, Franz Ferdinand was permitted to marry Sophie, but under the strict condition that their marriage would be morganatic. This meant their children would be excluded from the line of succession and would not inherit any Habsburg titles or claims. Sophie herself would not be addressed as Empress or even Archduchess, but as Duchess of Hohenberg. This humiliation, constantly present in their lives, deeply affected Sophie and angered Franz Ferdinand, who felt it was a cruel injustice. Records confirm that the couple deeply loved each other, often sharing private moments away from the scrutiny of the court. Their home life was described as warm and happy, a stark contrast to the cold formality of court. Despite the personal slights, Franz Ferdinand began to prepare himself for his future role. He developed his own political ideas, which often clashed with the established order. He was a proponent of a Greater Austria solution, often called trialism, which sought to elevate the Slavic peoples within the empire to a position equal to that of the Hungarians and Germans. This vision aimed to decentralize power and alleviate the growing nationalist tensions, a stark departure from the current dual monarchy system established by Emperor Franz Joseph. His progressive views on national minorities and his desire for military modernization were often met with suspicion and resistance from the conservative elements at court. He was known to gather a group of advisors around him discussing reforms and preparing for his future reign. His relationship with Emperor Franz Joseph remained strained. The emperor viewed Franz Ferdinand with a mixture of exasperation and grudging respect. The morganetic marriage was a constant point of friction, and the Archduke's independent mind and reformist ideas often annoyed the aging monarch. Documents from the imperial chancery show numerous disagreements between the two men regarding policy and protocol. In June 1914, Franz Ferdinand, in his capacity as Inspector General of the Austro-Hungarian Armed Forces, traveled to Sarajevo, the capital of Bosnia-Herzegovina, to oversee military maneuvers. Bosnia-Herzegovina had been formally annexed by Austria-Hungary in 1908, a move that inflamed Serbian nationalists who sought to unite all South Slavs under a greater Serbia. Sophie accompanied him on this fateful trip, a rare public appearance for her, as she was only permitted to join him for military inspections due to her lower rank. On the morning of June 28, 1914, their motorcade was attacked by a group of Serbian nationalist assassins. An initial bomb attempt failed, bouncing off the Archduke's car and injuring others. Despite the danger, the Archduke decided to continue with the planned reception at the City Hall. After the reception, Franz Ferdinand insisted on visiting the injured in the hospital. The driver, taking a wrong turn, stopped the car directly in front of Gavrilo Princip, one of the conspirators. Princip had seized the opportunity, firing 2 shots from his pistol. The first bullet struck Sophie in the abdomen, and the second hit Franz Ferdinand in the neck, severing his jugular vein. According to historical accounts from those present, Sophie died almost instantly. Franz Ferdinand, gasping, reportedly pleaded with her, Sophie, don't die. Stay alive for our children." He then slumped over, dying shortly thereafter. The assassination, a shocking act of political violence, immediately set off a chain of events that culminated in the outbreak of the First World War just weeks later. The Archduke's death, far from stabilizing the empire, ignited the very powder keg he had sought to defuse. His dreams of reforming the empire died with him on the streets of Sarajevo, paving the way for its ultimate collapse. Number 8. Rudolf, Crown Prince of Austria. Crown Prince Rudolf, born in 1858, was the only son of Emperor Franz Joseph and Empress Elizabeth. From his earliest days, he was groomed to inherit the vast Habsburg Empire, receiving an education designed to prepare him for the immense responsibilities of the throne. He was intelligent, curious, and possessed a keen interest in science and natural history, a passion encouraged by his tutor, the liberal Count Joseph Latour von Thurnberg. Rudolf embraced progressive ideas, holding views that often clashed with the conservative traditions of the Viennese court and his own father. He was a keen observer of political and social developments, developing a more liberal outlook than his parents. He anonymously wrote articles for a prominent Viennese newspaper, expressing his political opinions. His relationship with his parents was complex and often strained. His father, Emperor Franz Joseph, was a man of routine and duty, deeply traditional and wary of change. Rudolf's liberal leanings and intellectual pursuits created a chasm between them. The emperor found his son's reformist ideas unsettling and viewed his scientific interests as eccentric distractions from the serious business of imperial governance. His mother, Empress Elizabeth, though also unconventional, was emotionally distant and often absent, pursuing her own interests in poetry, travel, and beauty. Rudolf felt a lack of understanding and emotional support from both parents, leading to a sense of isolation within the imperial family. Letters between Rudolf and his tutors, later uncovered, reveal a sensitive and often melancholic young man struggling with the expectations placed upon him. In 1881, Rudolf married Princess Stephanie of Belgium, a union arranged for dynastic purposes. The marriage was reportedly unhappy from the start. Stephanie, though intelligent, was seen by Rudolf as conventional and intellectually unstimulating. They had one daughter, Archduchess Elizabeth Marie, known as Ursi. Rudolf engaged in numerous extramarital affairs, seeking solace and intellectual companionship outside his marriage. His health, both physical and mental, began to deteriorate. He suffered from venereal diseases, which he contracted from his many liaisons, and his physical condition was worsened by mercury treatments for these ailments, which had severe side effects. He also struggled with depression and a growing sense of despair about his future, and the future of the empire he was destined to inherit. His letters and diaries, some of which have been published posthumously, hinted a man grappling with deep unhappiness and a profound sense of hopelessness. Rudolf became increasingly disillusioned with the state of the Austro-Hungarian Empire and his own inability to influence its direction. He saw the empire as a decaying entity plagued by nationalist tensions and an outdated political system. His progressive ideas were consistently rejected by his father, leaving him feeling powerless and frustrated. He felt trapped by his destiny, unable to escape the strictures of his position or enact the changes he believed were necessary. His intellectual friends included figures who shared his liberal views, and they often met in secret to discuss politics and social reform away from imperial surveillance. The tragic climax of Rudolf's life occurred on January 30th, 1889, at the Imperial Hunting Lodge in Merling, a remote estate south of Vienna. He was found dead alongside his 17-year-old mistress, Baroness Mary Wetzera. The official report issued by the court stated that Rudolf had died from heart failure. However, within days rumors circulated wildly suggesting a murder-suicide pact. The truth, carefully suppressed by the imperial family, began to emerge over time. Historical investigations and recently available documents from the Habsburg family archives confirm that Rudolf shot Mary Wetzera and then himself. He had allegedly made a similar pact with another mistress some months earlier, but she had backed out. Mary Wetzera, described in contemporary accounts as infatuated with the crown prince, was found lying in bed next to him. The immediate aftermath was a desperate attempt by the imperial court to control the narrative and minimize the scandal. Mary Wetzera's body was secretly transported from Merling and hastily buried in the cemetery at Heiligenkreuz. The lodge itself was quickly demolished by imperial command, and a Carmelite convent was built on the site. An attempt to cleanse the memory of the tragic event, Emperor Franz Joseph was devastated by his son's death, but his immediate concern was to protect the honor of the imperial family and the stability of the monarchy. The official story of heart failure was maintained for years, despite overwhelming evidence to the contrary. The true circumstances of Rudolf's death became one of the most enduring mysteries and scandals of the Habsburg dynasty, a dark shadow cast over the final decades of the empire. The loss of his only son left Emperor Franz Joseph without a direct male heir, setting in motion the chain of succession that would eventually lead to Franz Ferdinand and the Sarajevo. Rudolf's story became a haunting symbol of the pressures and tragedies that could consume even the most privileged members of Europe's most powerful families. Number 7. Maximilian I of Mexico. Archduke Ferdinand Maximilian Joseph, born in 1832, was the younger brother of Emperor Franz Joseph, I of Austria. He was minot, handsome, and harbored a deep love for the sea, Pursuing a career in the Austrian Navy, he rose to the ranks, becoming Commander-in-Chief of the Imperial Austrian Navy, a position he used to modernize the fleet and initiate scientific expeditions. Unlike his austere older brother, Maximilian possessed a romantic and idealistic temperament, a fondness for art, botany, and grand gestures. He preferred the warmth of his exquisite Miramare castle near Trieste to the stiff formalities of the Viennese court. Contemporary records show he was well liked by those who served under him in the Navy, known for his affability and adventurous spirit. In 1857, he married Princess Charlotte of Belgium, the daughter of King Leopold I. Their union was reportedly a happy one, though they remained childless. Charlotte, intelligent and ambitious, was a strong partner for Maximilian, sharing his artistic interests and supporting his endeavors. For a period, Maximilian served as governor of Lombardy-Venetia, the Austrian territories in Italy. His liberal policies and attempts at modernization, however, clashed with the rigid conservative views of Vienna, leading to his recall in 1859. This rejection fueled his desire for a grander, more independent role, a kingdom of his own. His opportunity arrived unexpectedly from an ocean away. In the early 1860s, France, under Emperor Napoleon III, intervened in Mexico, ostensibly to collect debts, but with the broader ambition of establishing a Latin American empire to rival the United States and boost French prestige. Napoleon III, along with Mexican conservatives who were weary of civil war and secular reforms, offered Maximilian the crown of Mexico. The prospect of becoming an emperor appealed strongly to Maximilian's romantic sensibilities. He envisioned bringing enlightenment and order to a new world. Emperor Franz Joseph, however, was highly skeptical of the venture, advising his brother against it and insisting that Maximilian formally renounce his rights to the Austrian throne. Before departing, a move Maximilian reluctantly agreed to, records confirm that Franz Joseph was concerned about the cost and political instability of such an undertaking. In 1864, Maximilian and Charlotte sailed to Mexico, arriving to a country still deeply divided and ravaged by internal conflict. He established his court in Mexico City, attempting to implement liberal reforms including land reforms and religious tolerance which alienated the conservative Mexicans who had invited him. Simultaneously, his presence further angered the Mexican Republicans, led by Benito Juarez, who saw him as a foreign invader. Maximilian found himself caught between conflicting factions, with little genuine support from either side. The French troops, his primary support, became increasingly stretched and unpopular. Historical accounts describe him as well-intentioned but naive, often out of touch with the harsh realities of Mexican politics and society. The tide began to turn against Maximilian. The American Civil War ended in 1865, allowing the United States, a staunch supporter of republicanism, to exert diplomatic pressure on France to withdraw its troops from Mexico. Napoleon III, facing growing domestic pressures and a looming conflict with Prussia, decided to recall his forces in 1866. This left Maximilian exposed and vulnerable, with only a small contingent of loyal Mexican and European troops. Charlotte, frantic and desperate for aid, traveled to Europe to plead with Napoleon III and then to Pope Pius IX. Her pleas fell on deaf ears. The stress and betrayal took a severe toll on her mental health. She began to suffer from paranoia and ultimately went insane, never to return to Mexico. She spent the rest of her long life in seclusion in Belgium, outliving her husband by 60 years. Despite the growing danger and pleas from his brother Franz Joseph to return to Austria, Maximilian refused to abandon his imperial project. He felt a moral obligation to his loyalists and to the Mexican people he believed he was destined to rule. He withdrew with his remaining forces to Querétaro, where they were besieged by Republican forces under General Mariano Escobedo. After a lengthy siege, Maximilian was betrayed by one of his own officers and captured in May 1867. A military court-martial quickly condemned him to death. Despite international pleas for clemency from European monarchs, including a direct appeal from Queen Victoria and Victor Hugo, Benito Juárez refused to commute the sentence. Juárez reportedly declared that the execution was necessary to prevent any future foreign intervention in Mexico and to affirm Mexican sovereignty. On June 19, 1867, Maximilian, along with two of his loyal generals, Miramon and Mejia, faced a firing squad on the Hill of the Bells outside Querétaro. His final words, according to historical reports from the scene, were, "I forgive everyone, and I ask everyone to forgive me. May my blood, which is about to be shed, flow for the good of the country. Long live Mexico." His execution sent shockwaves across Europe, a brutal lesson in the perils of foreign intervention and an ignominious end for a Habsburg archduke who had dreamed of building an empire in the New World. His tragic fate became a cautionary tale, etched into the annals of imperial ambitions gone terribly wrong. Number 6. Joseph II. Joseph II, born in 1741, was the eldest son of Empress Maria Theresa and Emperor Francis I. From his earliest years, he was groomed for rule, subjected to a regiment agiles all-encompassed in Lawfriend. He was intelligent, energetic, and possessed a deeply serious, almost humorless disposition. Unlike his pragmatic mother, Joseph was driven by an abstract vision of reason and efficiency, believing passionately in the power of the state to improve the lives of its subjects through rational reform. His tutors and early biographers noted his immense capacity for work and his commitment to enlightened principles, often clashing with his mother's more cautious approach. His early life was largely overshadowed by his formidable mother. Maria Theresa, having fought tooth and nail for her inheritance, was determined to retain control of her empire. Joseph was crowned King of the Romans in 1764 and Holy Roman Emperor in 1765. After his father's death, but he remained co-ruler with his mother until her passing in 1780. During this period, he embarked on extensive travels across Europe, observing different administrative systems and meeting other enlightened monarchs like Frederick the Great. Of Prussia, he often expressed frustration with his mother's conservative policies, particularly her reluctance to abolish serfdom and her more lenient stance towards the Catholic Church. Records indicate constant disagreements between mother and son regarding the pace and extent of reforms, with Maria Theresa often reining in Joseph's more radical impulses. He reportedly found his position as co-ruler restrictive and often felt his ideas were not given due consideration. Upon Maria Theresa's death in 1780, Joseph finally gained sole power over the vast Habsburg lands. He immediately embarked on an ambitious program of reforms, often called Josephinism, which aimed to transform the empire into a centralized, modern, and efficient state. His reforms touched almost every aspect of society, often with a rapid top-down approach that paid little heed to traditional customs or regional differences. He abolished serfdom, granting peasants personal freedom and greater rights, a revolutionary step that deeply angered the nobility. He introduced sweeping judicial reforms, establishing a single code of law for the entire empire and abolishing torture. He promoted religious tolerance, issuing the Edict of Tolerance in 1781, which granted considerable freedom of worship to Protestants, Orthodox Christians, and Jews, a radical departure from centuries of Habsburg Catholic dominance. He suppressed hundreds of contemplative monasteries, confiscating their lands and using the proceeds to fund schools and hospitals, arguing that only useful institutions should exist. He sought to place the Catholic Church under state control, earning him the nickname, the Sacristan Emperor. Joseph also reformed the educational system, establishing new schools and universities, and made German the sole administrative language throughout the diverse empire, aiming to unify the disparate populations. He initiated economic reforms, attempting to remove internal tariffs and stimulate trade. He even opened the imperial parks like the Prater in Vienna to the public. a symbolic gesture of his commitment to his subjects. Contemporary chroniclers noted his intense work ethic. He would often spend 16 hours a day at his desk, meticulously reviewing every detail of his reforms, seemingly fueled by an unshakable belief in the correctness of his policies. However, the sheer speed and radical nature of his reforms often backfired. His decree that all funerals be held without coffins, using regobic shrouds and mass graves for sanitary reasons, was met with such outrage from the public that he was forced to repeal it. His attempts to impose German as the universal language provoked strong nationalist reactions in Hungary and the Austrian Netherlands, leading to widespread resistance and even open revolt. The nobility and clergy, whose privileges were curtailed by his reforms, deeply resented his policies. Many peasants, while freed from serfdom, found the new bureaucratic systems confusing and impersonal. He alienated almost every segment of society with his uncompromising approach. Joseph's foreign policy was equally ambitious and often ill-fated. His attempts to exchange the Austrian Netherlands for Bavaria, aimed at consolidating his power in Central Europe, were thwarted by Frederick the Great. He also became embroiled in a costly and unpopular war with the Ottoman Empire, alongside Russia, which further drained imperial resources and exposed the vile beauties of his army. By the end of his reign, Josephus was a disillusioned man. He faced widespread opposition at home and Seprabes Rethbrai the Shish. Many of his reforms, though visionary in concept, were poorly implemented or met with such resistance that they had to be partially or wholly revoked. His health, always somewhat frail, deteriorated rapidly under the strain. He reportedly remarked on his deathbed in 1790, "Here lies Joseph II, who failed in everything he undertook." Despite his own assessment, his reign laid the groundwork for many future changes and established a legacy of enlightened absolutism that influenced subsequent European rulers. His relentless pursuit of reform, though ultimately a source of profound personal frustration, highlighted the tensions between traditional power and the Jog ideals of the Enlightened. Number 5. Maria Theresa. Archduchess Maria Theresa Walburga Amalia Christina, born in 1717, was an unlikely heir to the sprawling Habsburg patrimony. She was the eldest daughter of Emperor Charles VI, who had spent much of his reign desperately trying to ensure that his female heir could succeed him. He issued the Pragmatic Sanction in 1713, a decree designed to guarantee the indivisibility of the Habsburg lands and allow for female succession. Despite decades of diplomatic efforts and numerous agreements with other European powers, the Pragmatic Sanction's validity would be severely tested upon Charles VI's death. Maria Theresa was described by contemporaries as a vibrant, strong-willed girl with a striking beauty and an unwavering sense of duty, a trait she inherited from her ancestor. In 1736, she married Duke Francis Stephen of Lorraine, a man she genuinely loved and who became the father of her 16 children, including future emperors Joseph II and Leopold II and Queen Marie Antoinette of France. Her marriage was a rare example of a truly affectionate union within the often cold world of dynastic politics. Letters exchanged between the couple reveal a deep bond and mutual respect despite Francis Stephen's later infidelities. The true test of Maria Theresa's strength came in 1740 when her father, Charles VI, died. Immediately, several European powers, including Prussia, under Frederick the Great, Bavaria, and France, reneged on their promises to uphold the Pragmatic Sanction. They saw an opportunity to dismember the Habsburg monarchy, believing a young, inexperienced woman could not possibly defend her vast and disparate inheritance. Frederick the Great wasted no time invading the rich province of Silesia, igniting the War of the Austrian Succession. Maria Theresa, then only 23 years old and pregnant with her 4th child, found herself fighting for her very survival and the preservation of her ancient dynasty. Her coronation as Queen of Hungary in Pressburg, modern-day Bratislava, became legendary. Facing a hostile Hungarian nobility, she appeared before them, dressed in traditional Hungarian attire, holding her infant son Joseph, and delivered a passionate, tearful speech in Latin, appealing for their loyalty and aid. The Hungarian magnates, moved by her courage and vulnerability, famously pledged their life and blood to her cause. This moment, recounted by numerous historical chroniclers, marked a turning point in her struggle, securing crucial military support. The war lasted for 8 long years. Maria Theresa demonstrated remarkable resolve and political acumen. She reformed her army, choosing capable generals and raising taxes to fund the war effort. She made shrewd diplomatic alliances, particularly with Great Britain. Despite losing Silesia to Prussia in the Treaty of Aix-la-Chapelle in 1748, she managed to retain the rest of her hereditary lands. She never forgot the loss of Silesia, and it fueled her desire for revenge against Prussia, leading to the diplomatic revolution and the 7 Years' War a few years later. The loss of Silesia was a constant shadow over her reign, fueling her ambition to restore Habsburg prestige. After the War of the Austrian Succession, Maria Theresa embarked on a series of comprehensive reforms that revitalized the Habsburg monarchy. She centralized the administration, creating new government departments and streamlining the bureaucracy. She reformed the military, building a standing army and establishing military academies, including the famous Theresian Military Academy. She initiated economic reforms, promoting trade and industry. Education was a particular passion. She founded the University of Innsbruck and established the Theresian Military Academy, as well as a network of elementary schools, believing that an educated populace was essential for a strong state. Her reforms aimed to strengthen the state, increase tax revenue, and ensure the long-term survival of her dynasty. Records from her imperial chancellery show her meticulous attention to detail in these reforms. Her personal life continued to be intertwined with her public role. She adored her husband Francis Stephen, who, though Holy Roman Emperor, largely deferred to her in matters of state. His death in 1765 left her heartbroken. She wore mourning for the rest of her life and built a deep, emotional wall around herself. Her relationship with her many children, especially her eldest son Joseph II, was often complicated. She found his radical Enlightenment ideas too extreme and preferred a more cautious, gradual approach to reform. Their differing philosophies led to frequent clashes during their co-regency. Despite their disagreements, she managed to guide the empire through a period of immense change, laying the foundations for a modern bureaucratic state. Maria Theresa ruled for 40 years, dying in 1780. She was a devout Catholic, a devoted mother, and an exceptionally capable ruler who transformed the Habsburg monarchy from a collection of disparate lands into a formidable European power. Her legacy was that of a powerful female sovereign who not only successfully defended her inheritance against overwhelming odds, but also initiated a golden age of reform, ensuring the survival and prosperity of her dynasty. Her personal strength and unwavering commitment to duty made her one of the most influential monarchs in European history. Number 4. Charles II of Spain. Charles II of Spain, born in 1661, was the last of the Spanish Habsburg monarchs, and his life was a tragic testament to the devastating consequences of generations of royal inbreeding. From birth, he was a sickly and infirm child, possessing a weak constitution that plagued him throughout his life. His physical ailments were extensive. He suffered from rickets, an enlarged tongue that made speech difficult, hydrocephalus, and a protruding jaw, the famous Habsburg jaw, so severe that he could barely chew food. He was unable to walk until the age of 4, and did not speak coherently until he was 8. Contemporaries described him as constantly ill, barely able to stand the rigors of court life, and frequently on the verge of death. His childhood was a parade of doctors and ineffective treatments. His mental faculties were equally impaired. He possessed a limited intellect, often described as slow-witted and childlike. His upbringing was largely neglected by his mother, Mariana of Austria, who served as regent during his minority. The young king was left largely to the care of nurses and servants with little formal education. He rarely bathed, which was common for the era, but his general hygiene was reportedly poor. Royal physicians documented his numerous illnesses, which included seizures, fevers, and frequent bouts of extreme weakness. The Spanish court, steeped in rigid Catholic piety and superstition, often attributed his maladies to evil spirits or witchcraft, earning him the nickname El Hecnito, the Bewitched. Exorcisms were reportedly performed to cure his afflictions. Despite his severe disabilities, Charles II was crowned king in 1665 at the age of 4, inheriting a vast but declining Spanish empire. His reign was largely dominated by his mother's regency, and later by various court factions and powerful ministers who vied for control. Spain, once the dominant power in Europe, was suffering from economic decline, military weakness, and political instability. The young king, incapable of effective rule, became a mere symbol, a puppet in the hands of various ambitious courtiers. His inability to provide strong leadership contributed to Spain's further decline on the international. Records show his signature on official documents was often shaky, barely legible, indicating his physical weakness. The most critical issue of Charles II's reign was his inability to produce an heir. The survival of the Habsburg dynasty in Spain depended entirely on him, and his consistent ill health and suspected sterility became a source of immense anxiety for the court and for Europe's major powers. He married twice, first to Marie-Louise of Orléans, niece of King Louis XIV of France, in 1679. This marriage, intended to secure the succession, produced no children. Marie-Louise, lonely and likely distressed by her husband's condition, died mysteriously 10 years later. Charles was reportedly heartbroken by her death, showing a rare emotional connection. His second marriage in 1690 was to Maria Anna of Neuburg. This union also failed to produce an heir. The constant pressure on the king to procreate, combined with his physical incapacities, made his private life a public spectacle of futility. Doctors and theologians were consulted. Various remedies were attempted, and prayers for an heir were offered throughout the kingdom. The barrenness of the two marriages fueled the rumors of him being bewitched, as it was considered an unnatural state for a king. As Charles II's health continued its slow, agonizing decline, the question of the Spanish succession became the paramount issue in European diplomacy. Without a direct heir, the vast Spanish territories, including Spain itself, its colonial empire in the Americas, the Spanish Netherlands, and its Italian possessions, were up for grabs. Louis XIV of France, whose wife was Charles II's half-sister, claimed the throne for his grandson Philip, Duke of Anjou. Emperor Leopold, the first Charles II's first cousin and head of the Austrian Habsburgs, claimed it for his own son, Archduke Charles. The potential shift in the balance of power was enormous, leading to intense diplomatic maneuvering and secret treaties among the European powers. In his final years, Charles II suffered increasingly from convulsions, hallucinations, and severe pain. He became almost entirely senile, his mind wandering. Just weeks before his death, under immense pressure from various factions, he signed a will naming Philip, Duke of Anjou, as his sole heir. This decision, influenced by French diplomacy and possibly by the Pope, aimed to keep the Spanish territories intact rather than allow them to be partitioned. Charles II died in November 1700, at the age of 38. His autopsy revealed a body riddled with deformities and disease. His heart was the size of a peppercorn, his lungs corroded, his intestines putrefied, and he possessed a single shriveled testicle that was black. His death triggered the War of the Spanish Succession, a brutal 13-year conflict that reshaped the political map of Europe. The war ultimately placed a Bourbon on the Spanish throne, ending 2 centuries of Habsburg rule in Spain. Charles II's life, a prolonged agony of physical and mental suffering, symbolized the tragic end of a once mighty dynasty, a direct consequence of the desperate efforts to maintain the purity of their bloodline. Number 3. Rudolf II. Rudolf II, Holy Roman Emperor, King of Hungary and Bohemia, Archduke of Austria, born in 1552, was one of the most enigmatic and reclusive Habsburg rulers. His early life was marked by a strict Jesuit education in Spain, under the watchful eye of his uncle, King Philip II. This period in the devout and rigid Spanish court profoundly influenced his psyche, contributing to his lifelong melancholic temperament and deep-seated religious conservatism. However, upon his return to Vienna in 1571, his interests began to diverge from the expected path of a Habsburg monarch. He developed a strong fascination with art, science, and the occult. He reportedly preferred solitary pursuits to courtly duties, often withdrawing into his private chambers. Rudolf succeeded his father, Emperor Maximilian II, in 1576. Rather than ruling from Vienna, the traditional Habsburg seat, Rudolf gradually moved his court to Prague, the ancient capital of Bohemia, by 1583. This move was not just a change of scenery, it reflected his desire to escape the political pressures and religious conflicts of Vienna, allowing him to pursue his eclectic interests without constant scrutiny. Prague, under Rudolf, became a unique cultural and scientific hub, attracting scholars, artists, astronomers, alchemists, and charlatans from all over Europe. Records from the imperial treasury show immense sums spent on acquiring art and curiosities. He was a passionate patron of the arts, amassing an unparalleled collection of paintings, sculptures, and precious objects, much of which formed the core of the later Habsburg imperial collections. He commissioned works from renowned artists like Giuseppe Arcimboldo, whose whimsical portraits composed of fruits, vegetables, and books perfectly captured the emperor's curious tastes. His Kunstkammer, or Cabinet of Curiosities, was legendary, filled with exotic animals, rare minerals, astronomical instruments, and mechanical automata. This collection was not merely for display. It was a reflection of his attempt to understand the universe through observation and collection, blending art, science, and natural history. Beyond art, Rudolf was deeply engrossed in the study of alchemy and astrology, which were considered legitimate sciences at the time. He employed famous figures like Tycho Brahe, the Danish astronomer, and Johannes Kepler, who later formulated his laws of planetary motion, providing them with instruments and resources for their research. He hoped that alchemy would lead him to the philosopher's stone and the elixir of life, and that astrology would reveal the secrets of his destiny and the fate of his empire. He spent countless hours in his laboratories, often experimenting himself, seeking to transmute base metals into gold. These pursuits, though intellectually stimulating for him, often distracted him from the pressing political and religious issues of his empire. Contemporary accounts describe him spending days locked away, emerging only to issue cryptic commands or admire a new acquisition. Rudolf's reclusiveness and eccentricities made him an increasingly ineffective ruler. He suffered from bouts of severe melancholy and what was likely clinical depression, exacerbated by his introverted nature and the pressures of his position. He often refused to meet with his ministers, delayed signing state documents, and neglected the pressing affairs of state. The religious tensions between Catholics and Protestants simmering across the Holy Roman Empire escalated under his detached rule. His indecision and lack of action allowed the Protestant nobility in Bohemia to grow increasingly powerful, laying the groundwork for the later Bohemian Revolt in the 30 Years' War. Diplomatic correspondents from the period often complained of the difficulty in gaining an audience with the emperor, or of his evasiveness when they did. His growing incapacitation and refusal to marry or produce an heir became a major concern for the Habsburg family. His younger brothers, particularly Archduke Matthias, grew frustrated with his erratic rule. Eventually, a family compact was formed to depose him. In 1608, Rudolf was forced to concede Hungary, Austria, and Moravia to Matthias. In 1611, the Bohemian estates, tired of his inaction and fearing a Catholic backlash, compelled him to cede the Bohemian crown to Matthias. As well, Rudolf was effectively stripped of all his titles, except for the ceremonial Holy Roman Emperor, which he formally renounced shortly before his death. Rudolf II died in 1612, a lonely and disillusioned man, essentially under house arrest, in Prague Castle. His reign, though a period of cultural brilliance and scientific inquiry, was also marked by political decay and the exacerbation of religious divisions that would soon plunge Europe into one of its most devastating conflicts. He chose the pursuit of knowledge and art over the responsibilities of kingship, leaving behind a legacy of both magnificent intellectual curiosity and profound imperial neglect. His life, filled with rare and beautiful objects, ultimately became a testament to the isolation that absolute power, combined with a fragile mind, could impose. Number 2. Philip II of Spain. Philip II, King of Spain, born in 1527, was the only legitimate son of Emperor Charles V and Isabella of Portugal. He inherited the most expansive empire the world had ever seen, a vast collection of territories that included Spain, its American colonies, the Spanish Netherlands, parts of Italy, and Portugal. From an early age, Philip was groomed for this immense responsibility. Unlike his peripatetic father, Philip was a man of intense discipline, meticulousness, and deep religious conviction. He was trained in statecraft, fluent in several languages, and possessed an unwavering belief in his divine right to rule. Contemporary chroniclers often remarked on his serious demeanor and tireless work ethic. His reign from 1556 to 1598 was characterized by his unwavering commitment to the Catholic faith and his ambition to maintain Spain's dominance in Europe. He was known for his austere lifestyle, his preference for working in his private chambers, and his reliance on written documents. He personally reviewed countless dispatches and reports, meticulously annotating them with his own handwriting. His administrative style was centralized and bureaucratic, ensuring that all major decisions passed through his hands, often leading to slow decision-making. He rarely left Spain, preferring to govern from his desk, famously building the vast palace monastery of El Escorial outside Madrid, which served as his residence, government office, monastery, and royal mausoleum. The construction of El Escorial, a monument to both his piety and his power, consumed decades of his reign. Philip was married 4 times, each union a strategic alliance aimed at securing his empire and his dynastic ambitions. His first marriage was to Maria Manuela, Princess of Portugal, who died shortly after giving birth to their only son, Don Carlos. His second marriage to Queen Mary, the First of England, was an attempt to bring England back into the Catholic fold and unite the two kingdoms, but it was childless and ended with Mary's death. His third marriage to Elizabeth of Valois, daughter of King Henry II of France, was a more affectionate match, producing 2 daughters. His fourth and final marriage was to his niece Anna of Austria, who finally bore him a surviving male heir, the future Philip III. The most famous tragedy of his personal life involved his first son and heir, Don Carlos. Born in 1545, Don Carlos was physically deformed and mentally unstable, possibly due to the extensive inbreeding within the Habsburg and Portuguese royal families. He suffered from erratic behavior, violent outbursts, and a rebellious nature that often brought him into conflict with his father. Philip's relationship with his son was deeply strained, marked by suspicion and distrust. In 1568, after Don Carlos reportedly plotted against his father and engaged in dangerous intrigues, Philip II ordered his arrest and confinement in a tower in Madrid. Don Carlos died a few months later, still imprisoned under mysterious circumstances. The official explanation was natural causes, but rumors of poisoning or forced starvation persisted. This episode cast a dark shadow over Philip's reign, fueling his image as a stern, unyielding, and sometimes cruel monarch. Philip II's reign was dominated by continuous warfare and religious conflict. He was a staunch defender of the Catholic Counter-Reformation, relentlessly opposing Protestantism across Europe. He sent a Spanish armada against Protestant England in 1588, a massive naval fleet aimed at invading the island and deposing Queen Elizabeth I. The armada, however, was famously defeated by English naval forces and severe storms, a catastrophic blow to Spain's prestige and Philip's imperial ambitions. This defeat, according to naval records, cost Spain immense resources and many ships. He also waged a protracted and brutal war against the rebellious Protestant Netherlands, a conflict that drained Spain's resources for decades. He intervened in the French Wars of Religion, supporting Catholic factions against the Huguenots. His wars were immensely costly, leading to repeated bankruptcies of the Spanish treasury. Despite the setbacks, Philip II saw himself as God's chosen instrument, leading a crusade to defend Catholicism. His meticulous and often solitary nature earned him the nickname the Spider King, due to his perceived control over a vast web of political intrigue. He maintained a vast network of spies and informants throughout Europe, ensuring he was informed of even the slightest movements of his enemies. He believed in absolute power, exercised through a massive centralized bureaucracy. Philip II died in 1598 at El Escorial. After a long and agonizing illness, reportedly from gout and a severe fever, having ruled for 42 years, his body ravaged by disease and covered in painful sores, endured great suffering in his final weeks, which he bore with a stoic piety. Believing it was God's will, he left behind an empire at the peak of its geographical extent, but also one burdened by immense debt, continuous warfare, and the beginnings of a long decline. His legacy was that of a devout, diligent, and unyielding monarch, who shaped the destiny of Spain and profoundly influenced the course of European history through his unwavering commitment to his faith and his empire. His efforts solidified Spain's position as a global power for a time, though at a significant human and financial cost. Number 1. Charles V. Charles V, born in 1500 in Ghent, was perhaps the most powerful and influential ruler of the Habsburg dynasty, presiding over an empire on which the sun truly never set. His inheritance? From his father, Philip the Handsome, he inherited the Low Countries and the Habsburg lands in Austria. From his maternal grandparents, Ferdinand II of Aragon and Isabella I of Castile, he inherited the crowns of Spain with its vast New World, colonies in the kingdoms of Naples, Sicily, and Sardinia. From his paternal grandfather, Maximilian I, he gained the title of Holy Roman Emperor. By the age of 19, Charles found himself ruler of a collection of territories spanning Central Europe, Spain, Italy, and much of the Americas, an inheritance so immense it was almost unmanageable. Contemporary observers marveled at the sheer scale of his domains. His early education exposed him to a range of cultures and languages. He was fluent in French, Spanish, German, and Latin, a necessity for governing such a diverse empire. He was a devout Catholic, a conviction that would shape much of his reign. He saw himself as the temporal head of Christendom, entrusted by God to defend the Catholic faith and maintain peace in Europe. This belief, however, clashed repeatedly with the realities of political power and the rising tide of the Protestant Reformation. Charles V's reign from 1519 to 1556 was marked by incessant warfare and immense challenges. He faced three major adversaries throughout his life. The first was France under King Francis I. Their rivalry was personal and political, a struggle for dominance in Italy and across Europe. They fought a series of wars over 2 decades, draining both empires of resources. Charles repeatedly defeated Francis, even capturing him at the Battle of Pavia in 1525, but could never fully subdue France. These wars cemented his reputation as a formidable military leader. The second major challenge came from the Ottoman Empire under the formidable Sultan, Suleiman the Magnificent. The Ottomans were expanding rapidly into Eastern Europe, threatening Vienna itself. and controlled the Mediterranean, disrupting trade and conducting raids on Christian lands. Charles V saw himself as the bulwark of Christendom. Against the Ottoman advance, he personally led military campaigns like the expedition against Tunis in 1535, but the threat remained constant, forcing him to divert significant resources to his eastern and southern borders. Chronicles of his campaigns highlight his personal bravery, often leading his troops from the front. The third and perhaps most profound challenge was the Protestant Reformation. Martin Luther's 95 Theses in 1517 ignited a religious revolution that fractured the unity of the Holy Roman Empire and challenged the authority of the Catholic Church. Charles V, as a staunch Catholic and Holy Roman Emperor, felt it was his duty to suppress the heresy and restore religious unity. He convened the Diet of Worms in 1521, where Luther famously refused to recant his views. Despite repeated attempts to reconcile the Catholic and Protestant factions, through religious debates and military force, Charles ultimately failed to reverse the tide of the Reformation. The Schmalkaldic War in the 1540s, a conflict between Charles V and the Protestant princes of the Holy Roman Empire, ended in a stalemate. The Peace of Augsburg in 1555 eventually recognized the right of rulers to choose Catholicism or Lutheranism for variation. Charles V spent little time in any one place, moving between his various kingdoms, personally overseeing governance. He often traveled by sea, braving storms and pirates. His movements are meticulously recorded in imperial travelogues, showing a ruler constantly on the move from Spain to the Netherlands, Germany, and Italy. This constant travel and the immense pressures of his rule took a heavy toll on his health. He suffered from severe gout, indigestion, and other ailments, which grew increasingly debilitating in his later years. In 1556, in an unprecedented move, Charles V voluntarily abdicated his various crowns. He divided his vast empire, granting the Holy Roman Empire to his brother Ferdinand I, and the Spanish Empire, including the Netherlands, Italy, and the New World, to his son Philip II. This decision, a profound act of self-renunciation, shocked Europe. He had come to believe that the burdens of his office were too great for one man, and that the religious and political divisions of his empire were beyond his power to mend. He longed for a life of peace and contemplation. After his abdication, Charles V retired to the monastery of Yusta in Spain, a secluded Hieronymite monastery in Extremadura. He lived a relatively simple life there, dedicating himself to prayer, gardening, collecting art, and indulging his love for mechanical clock. He continued to follow European affairs closely, receiving visitors and writing letters, but he no longer held the reins of power. He died in Yuste in 1558, at the age of 58, reportedly, from malaria. His death marked the definitive end of an era, a truly global monarch who had grappled with the forces that would define modern Europe: religious division, dynastic rivalry, and the expansion of global empires. His unique abdication, choosing spiritual solace over temporal power, remains one of the most remarkable acts in the history of European monarchy.